Before we begin, if you value serious, research-driven history that looks past battlefield maps and into the lived reality of survival, subscribe to the Survival Record. This channel is dedicated to the overlooked details, the small decisions and improvised solutions that determined who endured and who didn't. When most people think about food in the Second World War, they think about ration books at home, or the standard-issue field rations handed out by quartermasters. But for soldiers operating behind enemy lines cut off from supply chains, survival rarely depended on officially sanctioned meals. It depended on foods that were local, portable, storable, and psychologically sustaining. What kept men alive in forests, snowfields, deserts, and ruined cities was not always what was listed in military supply manuals. It was what could be found, carried, preserved, traded for, or remembered from home. These were not luxury items. They were soul foods in the most literal sense. Simple staples that preserved strength, morale, and continuity in environments designed to strip all three away. And their stories reveal something deeper about modern warfare. How survival doctrine evolved not only from weapons and tactics, but from bread, fat, beans, and broth. Hardtack and ship's biscuits proved that endurance often depends on what does not spoil. Hardtack had been feeding armies for centuries, and by World War II it still played a role, particularly in naval and expeditionary contexts. In the United States military, it appeared in variations of the sea ration and emergency store. In the British forces, ship's biscuits retained a similar presence. What made hardtack valuable was not taste, but stability. It could survive humidity, rough transport, and long storage without refrigeration. Soldiers operating in the Pacific or in the North Atlantic convoy system often relied on it when fresh bread molded quickly in tropical climates or froze solid in Arctic ones. The lesson was logistical. Armies learned that calories are meaningless if they cannot withstand the environment. Modern survival rations, including high-density energy bars and vacuum-sealed crackers, reflect the same principle: durability first, palatability second. For soldiers behind enemy lines, something that would not rot was more reassuring than something that tasted good. Salt pork and lard carried more than calories. They carried metabolic resilience. In cold theaters such as the Eastern Front and the Ardennes, fat became indispensable. German troops advancing into the Soviet Union carried speck and preserved pork fat. Soviet soldiers relied heavily on salo, cured slabs of pork fat that required no cooking and resisted spoilage in freezing temperatures. Fat provided more than energy density. It sustained body heat and prolonged satiety during long periods without resupply. When German supply lines collapsed during winter campaigns, captured or locally sourced pork fat often became the difference between maintaining operational capacity and succumbing to exhaustion. Rice became the quiet backbone of survival across the Pacific. For Allied and Japanese troops alike, rice was not merely a staple, it was strategic infrastructure. Japanese forces in Southeast Asia structured entire campaigns around securing rice-producing regions. Allied prisoners of war, from Burma to the Philippines, survived largely on minimal rice allotments, often supplemented by foraged greens or smuggled protein. Rice stores well, cooks with limited equipment, and provides reliable calories. For guerrilla fighters in occupied territories, particularly in the Philippines and parts of China, rice could be hidden, transported discreetly, and cooked quickly before movement. But rice also exposed vulnerability. When Japanese logistics faltered and shipping lanes were cut by Allied submarines, rice shortages contributed directly to malnutrition in isolated garrisons. Control of food production became inseparable from control of territory. Beans and lentils, really sustained resistance movements when meat disappeared. Across occupied Europe, partisan groups relied heavily on legumes. In the mountains of Yugoslavia, resistance fighters survived on beans and coarse bread. In Italy and France, lentils and dried peas were common staples for underground networks. Legumes offered protein without livestock. They stored dry, resisted spoilage, and could be transported in small sacks without attracting attention. For irregular forces, this mattered a great deal. A single slaughtered animal could expose a hideout. A pot of beans did not. The protein content supported muscle repair during constant movement. For fighters who simply could not rely on steady meat supplies, legumes became the structural foundation of physical endurance. Chocolate and concentrated sugar, interestingly enough, were psychological tools disguised as rations. The United States military's D-ration chocolate bar was engineered to be high in calories and resistant to melting. It was intentionally formulated to be only mildly palatable, so soldiers would save it for emergencies. German troops received similar concentrated sweets. Sugar provided rapid energy, particularly during intense exertion or acute stress. But its psychological value was equally important. A piece of chocolate in a frozen foxhole offered continuity with civilian life. It interrupted the monotony of fear and fatigue. Coffee functioned as a stimulant, a ritual, and a stabilizer of routine. Coffee was, honestly, just everywhere across multiple armies. American troops carried instant coffee in their ration kits. German soldiers received ersatz coffee when real supplies ran low. Soviet troops consumed strong brews whenever possible. Caffeine enhanced alertness during night watches and long marches. But, more subtly, the act of brewing coffee reintroduced routine into chaos. Boiling water, sharing cups, maintaining a simple daily ritual. These behaviors grounded soldiers in familiarity. Survival doctrine now recognizes the role of routine in maintaining psychological stability. Whether through scheduled meals or shared preparation rituals, structure helps to mitigate stress. Coffee, in this sense, was less about stimulation than about preserving identity amid dislocation. Broth and improvised soups turned scraps into sustained endurance. On the Eastern Front and in the ruins of European cities, soldiers frequently resorted to soups made from bones, root vegetables, or whatever could be scavenged. Soviet field kitchens emphasized shchi, a cabbage-based soup, while German troops improvised stews from foraged ingredients when supply chains failed. Soup maximized scarce resources, boiling extracted nutrients from otherwise inedible scraps. It conserved fuel compared to frying and allowed for communal distribution. In war diaries, references to hot soup often appeared during moments of extreme hardship. Warm liquid restored body temperature, eased digestion, and created brief communal reprieve. Its importance was practical, not sentimental. Local bread, whether rye, barley, or coarse loaves, anchored soldiers to place and people. In occupied territories, soldiers often depended on bread acquired from civilians, traded for goods, or baked in improvised ovens. Soviet black bread, French peasant loaves, Italian barley bread, each became a lifeline. Bread is perishable, but grain is not. Control of mills and bakeries held strategic weight. German occupation authorities frequently requisitioned grain, while resistance networks sometimes sabotaged mills to deny occupiers resources. For soldiers isolated in hostile regions, bread from local ovens symbolized temporary acceptance, or at least negotiated coexistence. What these foods reveal about warfare is more important than the foods themselves. These 8 foods, hardtack, preserved fat, rice, legumes, chocolate, coffee, soup, and bread, were not glamorous. They rarely appear in cinematic depictions of World War II, yet they sustained armies when supply lines fractured and doctrine met reality. They illustrate that survival is rarely about abundance, it is about adaptability. Modern military rations reflect these lessons. Food is logistics, logistics is strategy, and strategy determines outcomes as surely as battlefield tactics. Remembering these details matters because it shifts our understanding of war away from abstraction. It reminds us that endurance is built from ordinary materials: grain, fat, beans, and boiling water. If you value this kind of in-depth historical analysis, do subscribe to the Survival Record and share this video with others who want to understand not just how wars are fought, but how people endure them.